I'm Tiffany from Team Terror Techies,
Hi, I'm Wit.
Hi, I'm Dan.
and we're going to talk today about cast. Actually, we're going to be doing a deep dive about our casting scoring.
When scoring cast, as well as with other categories that are actually done in the review process, we generally score on a 1 to 10 scale. That scale for any of the subcategories will be broken into additional categories to fine tune those scores, and then it is averaged amongst the three of us. Even then, that 1 through 10 we tend to break into three or three generalizations of low, medium, and high for effort and efficacy. This allows us to fine tune it on a review where we could say something is in the low category, but we don't quite know if it's a 1, 2, or 3, and so we can average that out based on our own opinions and score entries after that.
So, our first subcategory that we're reviewing is, are there enough actors in the haunt? And in reviewing the score, when you kind of go into a haunt, you get like a feeling of where it feels like rather there wasn't enough actors throughout the haunt, so that's going to be in like the lower end of like the 1 through 3, or rather there were enough actors but there were like missed opportunities, so then there's this like mid score, and then on a higher end that there was enough actors, and the ranges with that. When you first walk in, you kind of know which one it's going to be, and then more of rather it's a low score or like a low high score, depends on like how it's sustained throughout the haunt. So like as you're going through each room, we're looking at um is this really like a 2 actor room, or do you have an actor running in between the scenes? Some nights it makes sense to actually have actors do double duty like within scenes, but um is it appropriate to like what the storyline is, or again are there missed opportunities? So if one actor is actually trying to operate 2 different rooms, and both of the rooms are multiple actor rooms, do those rooms feel full, or do they feel like there's kind of like this dead zone, or you could tell like the actor went ahead and ran back to the other scene to scare the people behind you? So it kind of ranges throughout that.
We had a experience last year. The scene was set up as a massive junkyard that was supposed to be part of a zombie apocalypse, and big chain link fence set up, old Ford parked in the middle of it, and one actor. One actor for about 30 yards of chain link fence that was completely boxed in with a truck and a lot of other set pieces, and it just felt drab. It's not a. It felt like there could have been a whole lot more, and use of that space and that fence, and they weren't going for the fast zombie style in that, where they could have run up and down the fence and made better use of that space. It was the slow Walking Dead style zombies. Just didn't quite feel right.
So one of the experiences that I could think of where there was kind of like a mid-range type of haunt, um, is in general going through a haunt and there's actors in each of the rooms. Like the dead zones or transitions, you could fill them up with like special effects or animatronics, so it doesn't feel as empty, but you could kind of get like a sense that maybe it was like a skeleton crew kind of night, where you could see drop panels that weren't necessarily being used, but there are definitely drop panels where there could be actors.
As opposed, a high scoring haunt, has it's not required that every single inch of their haunt be completely full, but it has to be full enough that it feels alive at all times. And that's not to say that there can't be any dead spaces if they're intentional. But you want the kind of experience where every like couple of turns you're finding someone new that's doing something different. If there is a zombie horde, it doesn't need to be a packed throng of zombies, but there needs to be enough around that it feels like you're constantly running into a zombie somewhere along the way. And it doesn't, again, they don't need to be smashed shoulder to shoulder up against each other, but if every couple of steps, every couple of turns you're running into a new character, that's the kind of thing that helps a hunt feel full and alive.
Set design also helps with a lot of that, which can mask lower populations.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the hard thing with a lot of these categories, is that they're very interrelated to other categories, where you can relate back to scene. We'll get into other one, even the subcategories relate to each other. So that's also something that we do take into consideration while we're doing these scores, is look at how it's mostly like how it's appropriate for the haunt or the scene, or like what makes sense. The second subcategory that we review on is, are the characters believable? Are they convincing as the character that they are? And so, example, like the number one cardinal rule of haunts is that all of your actors stay in character. There's some things that make sense, like, for example, if there's an emergency, we would kind of expect actors to break out a character to like address the emergency. But for the most part, like, emergencies don't happen, so we're expecting actors to stay in their character. And that's even regardless of like how we interact and go through the haunt. So if we go ahead and we have a very interactive character that's asking us questions and we respond, what's a very common thing to see is essentially the actor isn't necessarily prepared for a response, or they haven't really developed that character beyond being able to ask questions. And because of that, or us saying a line or saying something, it kind of breaks that character illusion. So if you have like this big humongous character that's like a butcher kind of intimidation scare, and then all of a sudden, like, you'd be like, hey, do you want some fresh meat? And we like respond like, yeah, we want some fresh meat. And then he doesn't do anything. Like, it's just, it breaks that kind of like illusion in character, or like it's very like kind of like one way. So we'll talk about it a little bit later. Another one of the categories is dialogue, but
we'll get to that.
Get to that.
Yeah, one of the most egregious examples I could think of bad character not being believable was a dude just sitting there with this mask up, sitting on his phone, and then he saw that we're coming into the room, put his phone away, drop the mask, like that. Okay, you've already lost us, coming into the room, so there's no point at that point.
And there's also something different too of what's also really popular, like attending haunted houses. You could tell like actors like need to reset. They can reset in character. Like, there's an ability to reset while still in character and kind of scare, even though that whole illusion, like if they're a pop-out scare or like they came from somewhere, like, is kind of broken because you know where they're going into. But they could stay in character while they're like coming back at you or interacting with you. But what you commonly see is, if an actor is set off with the group in front of you and we're coming up behind that group, and then the actor comes back to reset, like the actor is just streamlined on getting back in their position. And so it kind of, again, drops that illusion of, oh, this character is like really believable. Again, going back to like my butcher stance, a lot of like butcher actors, not all of them, but like a lot of my butcher actors tend to not be like that in real life, and you can kind of tell that sometimes with like some actors if they drop it. So they'll like go after the group in front and they'll do really, really great, but once that's without reach and they're coming back as themselves. And so it's this like really, lighter character that's not really intimidating, or like, hey you guys, we want them to stay in character, and despite of like what's going on around them. But there are like a few exceptions. Can you think of?
Oh, I've had some interesting interactions with characters as they're doing the reset. And a lot of it boiled down to being able to improvise for having somebody stumble on you. I had a chainsaw actor once that had chased a group, obviously, and was starting to work their way back. And they started faking that they were having problems with the chainsaw when my group came around the corner. Because I heard the chainsaw running in the other direction, I knew there was a chainsaw somewhere in front of me, and they started mucking with it and then turning a dial and then snapped it up really quick and then came straight at me, forcing me to actually step aside, and then went through to their reset point. And so it turned a defensive walk back into, oh, I broke the thing, and then into an attack, which forced the group apart and allowed them to actually do the reset in character. You could tell that they were just trying to get back because there was no additional pursuit or a swipe or anything intimidating there, but it was enough that you got that experience of being charged, even if it was a fake charge.
So the third subcategory that we're going to head and review is, are the actors interactive? And this involves both interaction with their surroundings or within their scene. So it could be a prop that they have in hand, or it could be actually the scene that they're in. Or it also is, are they interact with customers?
To pick up on the butcher example, a lot of the people that are in a butcher shop, or at least the actors that do this, they focus on their table in front of them or whatever they're doing their butcher work on. They ignore their background, and sometimes they outright ignore the patrons themselves, or they're very repetitive. Like, come on, get your fresh meat here. Which, if you're trying to be a cannibal butcher, shouldn't you be sizing people up and saying they look like a good cut and doing everything else there? It's probably one of the easier places to do improvisation and actually do something unique for every party that comes through. And that's usually a big failing point for me, is a lot of the places that feature cannibal butchers just don't do a whole lot with it.
So going back to the low, medium, high, like in the stance that Dan was explaining, is like a low would be like there's no interactivity. There could be a couple actors, maybe, but most of them, like, we did not exist while we were walking through. Like, whether or not we walk through would not make a difference in the performance or matter, really.
So I will add a slight subtle caveat to that, in that there's sometimes it is appropriate for your actors to be interacting with one another and their scene, and you just happen to be in amongst the craziness. And sometimes that is appropriate, but if they are also, like, they're not interacting with the customers, they're not interacting with the scene, like, what they're doing, like, could be removed and put into a different room and it wouldn't be any different, then that's a complete failing on that part.
Yeah, so I could think of like a victim type character that might be screaming on help or get out or something like that, but they're not really struggling, they're not really going anywhere because they're like locked in a cage or whatever. That makes sense, but they're not even trying to convince us to get any closer to the cage. They're just there as being essentially like a talking head, or like could be replaced with like a voice box almost.
Voice box. If they can be replaced with an animatronic, there's something going wrong.
Yeah.
Horribly wrong.
So what would you think a like medium, mid-range score interactivity would be? Is it just on the number?
We'll stick with the butcher example. That's the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
A mid-range score would be somebody who's interacting with the table in front of them, even though I say that's drab, but at least coming up with something to interact with the patrons that are walking through. If they're being a little unique and throwing out different lines, at least on a 60-second loop, so it's long enough for somebody to get into earshot, get through there, and get back out, that's kind of a low-medium score. At least they're trying to interact and they're issuing lines. They may play off the patrons a little bit, but not all the time. It's helpful, not always in the best way, but at least that's it. It gets you some level of interaction, and they're trying to use their environment. They're not fully using their environment, but they're trying.
And I would say on like the higher spectrum, again, I mentioned Q line actors, and that's always a really easy thing because you have a longer sustained interaction with those characters. But there's other positions in a haunt, like you could have an actor in a transition area or that goes in between like a couple rooms, where you do have like a longer sustained where you met them or we interacted with them like in the beginning of the room, say in a drop panel, but they come out at the end of the room or something like that. Like a high interactivity would be really trying to figure out like how did they get from one location to another, even knowing like the mechanics probably like really makes sense, particularly if there's like a center area that they could run through, but it makes them appear more high energy. It makes them like they obviously know that we're there or somebody's going in their space. It and again, like a lot of the score on whether it's high or medium is how it is like room after room. You could have a high energy room or like a very high energy room at the end and then have like nothing in the beginning of the haunt, or you have like this very slow build that never really happens, and then you have like a couple good rooms. That would also affect the score as into whether or not it's going to score like high, medium, and low. Even though that one room is good, that room is not good enough to have the whole entire haunt be like high interactivity.
Right.
Carried on its back.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we have multiple rooms where actors are saying, "Hey, blue hair," "Hey, redneck," or whatever, those kinds of things.
That is applicable to me. It really is.
But if we have multiple rooms where the actors are calling out to us and our distinctive characteristics, and as well as making use of the rooms, and all of it seems to fit and make sense, that's the kind of thing where we would score high on interactivity.
Or the one that's really common is actors getting your name.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's a fake name that we gave them, or they're trying, like if they call me Rebecca or whatever, like I don't care. Call me Rebecca. You at least remembered that I was a Rebecca, or like know that, you kind of knew my name from another actor shouting it out. It's fine. It's just that shows more of you're aware that I'm there and I'm not just, hey, you. And then literally that line could be applicable to anybody that's physically there.
If you're an actor and watching this and you want to play with an audience, make up names and direct it at them and insist that's actually their name.
That was one of my favorite things to do as an actor was just...
Yeah.
I renamed people all the time.
You rename them, then you pursue them with that name and you insist that's actually them. And then you could, if you're doing the cannibal thing, oh yeah, I ate you last week.
Mm. So the next subcategory that we're going to head and review is creative dialogue. So are the actors using creative dialogue? They don't have to have a script that lasts for 4 hours and everything has to be unique, but I shouldn't hear an actor do the same exact scare with the group ahead of me or the group behind me. And that sounds very like technical and picky, but like if they only say like 2 or 3 lines, I mean, I feel like it has to be boring like as an actor to be on a loop like that too.
Yeah, I mean, one of my pet peeves is whenever I run into a clown and they say, "Hi!" I've seen that 1,000 times before. There's nothing interesting. There's nothing unique about it. And I mean, to kind of touch base on this a little bit, this does play into a little bit with the interactivity, which is important, but this is a very particular category where we're looking at what they're saying, what kinds of details they're pulling out, etc.
Dialogue is huge on interactivity. if you have a verbal character and you have something to play off of, use it. It makes it much better for everybody going through, including for us as we're trying to analyze the overall haunt.
Yeah. Other thing with like creative dialogue, like fresh meat.
Oh.
They're going to moan. I'm sorry, you guys. Fresh meat. Boo. Get out. Hey.
I mean, a creepy little girl singing nursery rhymes.
Yeah.
That actually works really well.
It really does.
Bonus points if you have your own lyrics to those nursery rhymes.
Ooh, even better. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of the lines that you hear over and over and over again, like even like when I was acting, I remember saying a lot of those lines. You get stuck in a loop. Particularly like, yeah.
If you have time to develop your character to funnel in on specific behaviors, you can use variations of a line set for your character that makes it so you don't become stagnant and fall into a loop of using the exact same line or content.
I will throw this example from my own experience. Hey, I only had 4 or 5 lines that I used on most groups. And every now and again, I would run into a group that would call me out. It's like, hey, you just said that to me earlier. And I'd be like, yeah, well, that's why they flunked me out of clown college. I only could learn a couple of tricks. Which, hey, that was also a pre-canned line in case I ran into that situation. I mean, you can still, reuse material. You just have to be really creative about what happens when people call you out on it.
And we're going to cover our last subcategory, which is, was there a good variety of characters? So, again, with how each of the subcategories kind of relate to each other, and even how the categories relate to each other, the subcategory is if the first one, where we talked about, is there enough actors? If there's not enough actors, there's not going to be a good variety of actors normally. Like, the two are really kind of contingent of each other. And that's kind of one of, again, the things of like when you're scoring, there's going to be kind of that ebb and flow of if there wasn't enough actors, or the actors that I did were like very not interactive, or not believable, or whatever. Like, they're all tied in together, related to each other. So as reviewers, we try to look through the whole entire house or the whole entire haunt. And for example, if you have a haunt that's all clowns, your clowns could vary. They shouldn't be the same clown. You can have sad clowns and happy clowns and hobo clowns, and clowns that actually make legit jokes, or clowns that make very corny jokes, or clowns that make dad jokes.
You really need to have the depressed clown that doesn't really make a joke but just cries.
Or you could even have, again, the intimidation clown, like a clown that's not really a clown that's supposed to be a creeper. Like, you could have a creeper clown. That's a total thing. But again, that's doing variety. So even though you have like the same character, it's a variety of that spectrum that character could be. So, going into good variety, what would you say like a low variety of character? It's probably literally having the same character.
If you have generic circus clown and they're all acting the exact same way, that's very low score. That is too common, too easy to deal with, versus, I don't know, killer clowns from outer space. Every one of those clowns was distinct.
Yeah, they shouldn't necessarily like seem like an actor could be lifted up from one scene and plopped into another scene and have no difference in dialogue, no difference in interaction, no difference with their scene. Like, they're not a different character. They're essentially the same character duplicated and performed by the same person. If you have a storyline, we should be able to pick up that character. be it a name or like we should be able to identify some hero characters. I would expect, like particularly like getting a higher score. Like I should be able to be like, ah yes, Jim. Now Jim was amazing, or Jim tried to cut off my face, or like being able to call out hero characters is huge. And I feel like it's hard to do that successfully in like a sustained way. Like you could have a haunt based off of like one singular character, but if that character or all the characters that are around it are absolutely the same, that's not really like a huge variety. You're basically going through the haunt trying to find this one hero character you heard of, and then like forgetting every other character that you came in interaction with because they all kind of like blend together. Again, this is another one where Q line actors kind of have help with it.
They have an advantage.
Yeah.
It's just that exposure time.
Right. And so, I mean, you can have a variety of characters. Like, if you think of, like, the different scares, like, you have a pop-up panel, and you have, like, a jack-in-a-box type of thing going on, or say if you have a crawler, like, you can have, like, a variety of characters like that, but it's easy to walk past a very, like, non-intergetic crawler. It's easy to walk past like a drop panel that was poorly timed.
And if you want names to be memorable and actors are interacting, they should be calling each other by their character name. Because if you're shouting a name, it's going to stand out, especially if that's part of that interaction.
Yeah, and you could even have characters, like I've had characters before where they kind of made it into like a game, like that's my password, in order to get past my room type of thing, or
props help.
Yeah, or you go into like a room and they ended up scribbling like if you go into like a character that's like a child and they ended up scribbling their name all over, so like you're looking for Jack. There's things that like kind of help again tying in scene, but at least you're able to like name them or identify them, and it's more again on like how with the variety of characters, and if you do have a story, like how does that portray out of visiting the haunt versus you could spend forever on developing a story and not really get that when you're walking through a haunt.
Yeah, I mean, especially with some groups, they're going to be running through just, screaming and not looking at anything that they don't have to, and they're going to lose all of that. But for, people like us that really like take our time and walk through, like we appreciate these details.